Before the world knew his name, before SpaceX or Tesla became household words, Elon Musk was just another college student. Tall, soft-spoken, and slightly out of step with the world around him. He wasn't the type to light up a room. In fact, most people didn't quite know what to make of him. He didn't party, he didn't socialize much. He read science fiction, dreamed about Mars, and thought deeply about things most teenagers barely considered. There was a quiet intensity to him, a kind of restlessness that couldn't be explained, only felt. And for Justine, the young woman who would eventually become his first wife, it was both strange and strangely magnetic. They met in college. He was 19, she was 18. And from the very beginning, Elon stood out, not because he was charming, but because he was persistent. He would call her repeatedly, each time with classical music softly playing in the background. Beethoven, Mozart, the kind of music that said he lived in his own universe. He asked her out. She said no. Then he asked again. Still no. This went on until one day, she said yes. There were no grand romantic gestures, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet, awkward boy who wouldn't stop calling, and a girl who eventually agreed to see what was behind the persistence. That simple yes marked the beginning of a journey that would take them from shared student apartments to a mansion in Bel-Air, from anonymity to global headlines. But in the beginning, they were just two young people trying to figure out their place in the world, with nothing but a small apartment, 3 roommates, and a miniature dachshund who was not house-trained. Looking back, it's easy to dismiss that early version of Elon Musk, the one with secondhand furniture and oversized dreams. But it's in those early moments that something essential reveals itself. Elon wasn't just trying to win someone's heart. He was trying to find a connection, to feel less alone in a world where his ideas often felt too big, too strange, too far ahead. It's a familiar pattern with people we now call visionaries. Long before they're praised, they're misunderstood. Before they're admired, they're labeled weird. They're the kids who talk too much about space, who get mocked for thinking differently, who walk through the world never quite fitting in. But sometimes, those very traits, the ones that make them outsiders, are the ones that enable them to change everything. Justine once said that Elon always seemed like he was living in 2 places at once, the world as it is and the world as it could be. And that's what set him apart. Not just intelligence, but vision. The kind of vision that makes ordinary life feel like a stepping stone to something far greater. And vision like that, it comes with a price. Because being able to imagine what others can't means being willing to be misunderstood, sometimes for a very long time. That was the young Elon Musk. Restless, intense, endlessly curious. A boy who kept calling. A girl who eventually said yes. And a dream that hadn't quite taken shape, but never stopped growing. And while the world now knows Elon as the billionaire innovator, the real story begins in that much quieter space. Before the rockets, before the fame, before the noise. When he was just a college kid with nothing but conviction, and a phone that never stopped ringing. But what happens when that kind of intensity is poured into not just relationships, but an entire mission? To answer that, we have to follow Elon into the next phase of his journey, where his dreams start to take form and the cost of chasing them begins to rise. In the early days, long before Elon Musk was a household name, his life with Justine was marked by simplicity. Some would even call it chaos. They lived in a cramped apartment in the Bay Area, sharing the space with 3 roommates and a miniature dachshund that, as Justine humorously recalled, was not house-trained. It was far from glamorous. The floors creaked, the furniture was mismatched, and privacy was something of a myth. They cooked simple meals, counted pennies, and carried the kind of dreams that felt impossibly large in a space so small. But that's where so many stories of greatness begin. Not in comfort, but in constraint. In close quarters, with too little sleep and too much ambition, foundations are laid. Those early days taught them how to work with what they had, how to dream bigger than their bank account, and how to live with uncertainty. Elon, even then, was obsessed with building. Zip2, his first company, was starting to take shape. He worked relentlessly, sometimes through the night, driven by a vision he couldn't shake and a fear of wasting time he didn't have. Years later, they found themselves in a very different setting. The roommates were gone. So were the creaky floors and the cheap cookware. In their place stood a sprawling mansion in Bel-Air, the kind of home that suggested the American dream had not only been achieved, but conquered. The surroundings had changed dramatically, but, as Justine would later point out with a smile, the dog still wasn't house-trained. It was a detail that stuck, seemingly small, even humorous, but it said something deeper. For all the progress, for all the millions and the mansions, some things stayed the same. The messiness, the imperfection, the reminders that no matter how far you go, you're still human. And perhaps more importantly, it underscored a truth that many forget when watching someone rise to success. Not everything evolves at the same pace. Elon had gone from coding in a shared apartment to leading a tech company worth hundreds of millions. But the journey hadn't smoothed out the rough edges. If anything, it had made them more apparent. The ambition had grown, the scale had changed, but the intensity remained. The man Justine married, the one who'd stay up all night thinking about interplanetary travel, was still there, only now operating on a much larger canvas. That contrast between past and present, between the boy in the apartment and the man in the mansion, is where so many stories about Elon find their tension. He moved fast. He outpaced most people, emotionally, intellectually, even physically. And as his orbit grew wider, it became harder for others to keep up. But even as the world around him shifted dramatically, there were clues that Elon hadn't really changed at all. Not deep down. He was still the kid who didn't quite fit in. Still the one with one foot on Earth and the other already stepping toward Mars. The wealth, the success, they were tools. But the mission? That came from somewhere much older, much more personal. And it's in that contrast, between the life he built and the man who built it, that we begin to understand the inner world of Elon Musk. Because behind every bold achievement is a cost. And behind every mansion is a trail of decisions, compromises, and relationships stretched thin. Which brings us to a question far more complicated than, how did he do it? It's the question of what it takes, what it truly costs, to live a life of such scale. And to answer that, we have to go deeper. Not into his companies or inventions, but into something more hidden, something harder to define. The part of Elon Musk that lives not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. There's a moment in an episode of The Simpsons where Elon Musk, playing a version of himself, shares a deeply emotional bond with Homer. It's oddly sweet, even funny, until one of the characters turns to another and says, "Someone like Elon must have a darkness in his soul." It was meant as a joke. But for Justine Musk, Elon's ex-wife, and someone who knew him long before the world did, that line struck a chord. Because beneath the surface of his brilliance, beneath the relentless ambition and groundbreaking ideas, there was always something else, something harder to define. A kind of darkness. But what does that really mean? Darkness, in the context of creative minds and visionaries, doesn't always mean evil. It doesn't mean cruelty or corruption. More often, it means something far quieter. A place inside that doesn't fit into polite conversation. A space where fear, obsession, loneliness, and vision all swirl together. It's the inner world of someone who sees life differently, who thinks in problems most people never consider, and who lives with questions most people never dare ask. Justine, a novelist herself, once quoted writer Lucy H. Pierce, who said, "As creatives, our job is to uncover what lies in the darkness and give it new life, new identity." And that may be one of the most accurate descriptions of how Elon Musk operates. Because when you look closely at the lives of great creators, whether they're building rockets or writing symphonies, you'll find a similar pattern. They don't just visit the dark, they live there. Not because they want to, but because that's where the ideas are. That's where truth lives, stripped of distraction and comfort. For Elon, that darkness often showed itself as intensity, an inability to slow down, an almost obsessive drive to move forward, even when everything was falling apart. He was the kind of person who didn't just dream. He felt compelled to chase those dreams, even at great personal cost. But genius, especially the kind that disrupts entire industries, doesn't come without a price. It demands energy, sacrifice, and often isolation. The higher the vision, the lonelier the climb. People admire Elon for his achievements, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, but very few consider what it costs to build those things. The sleepless nights, the emotional distance, the relationships that quietly fall apart while the world applauds. And in that way, the myth of the dark soul isn't really a myth at all. It's a reflection of a deeper truth, that many of the world's greatest minds carry a weight few others see. They don't always have balance. They don't always make good partners or parents or friends. But what they do have is fire, a relentless inner force that refuses to settle. For Elon, that fire lit up some of the most revolutionary companies of our time. But it also meant living in a state of permanent unrest. Restless not just about the future of technology, but about the future of humanity itself. Before Elon Musk learned how to launch rockets or lead billion-dollar companies, he had to learn something far harder: how to survive childhood. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon was a quiet, intensely curious boy. While other kids were playing outside, he spent hours buried in books, science fiction novels, encyclopedias, anything he could get his hands on. His mind was always racing, always reaching for something more. But in the world around him, that kind of mind didn't fit in. It made him a target. From a very young age, Elon was bullied, relentlessly. He wasn't just teased or left out. He was hunted, beaten, humiliated. At one point, a group of boys threw him down a flight of concrete stairs and kicked him until his face was so swollen he couldn't open one eye. He was hospitalized. And still, the bullying didn't stop. It wasn't just at school. Even at home, life wasn't easy. Elon's relationship with his father, Elon Musk, was complicated and painful. In interviews, Elon has described his father as emotionally abusive. Brilliant, yes, but also manipulative. A man who could destroy with words. And for a sensitive, inward-focused boy, those wounds cut deep. So Elon learned to escape the only way he knew how: through imagination, through code. At age 10, he taught himself how to program. By 12, he had built and sold a video game called Blastar, a simple space shooter made on a primitive computer. It wasn't flashy, but it was his. It was something he built from nothing, something no one could take away. And maybe that's where the seed was planted. The idea that technology could offer something the real world often didn't: control, possibility, safety. In a digital world, he wasn't the strange kid with bruises on his face. He was the creator, the architect, the one writing the rules. What's remarkable isn't just that Elon survived that chapter of his life, it's how he used it. Most people carry trauma like a weight. Elon carried his like rocket fuel. He didn't bury the pain. He repurposed it, turned it into momentum. That doesn't mean he forgot or healed completely. The scars of childhood don't disappear when you make your first million or even your first billion. But for some people, pain becomes a blueprint, a way of understanding how the world works and how to change it. Many of Elon's biggest projects, Tesla, SpaceX, even Neuralink, share something in common. They come from a desire to fix, to solve, to protect, to build a future where pain and powerlessness aren't inevitable. And it's worth asking, would Elon have chased those dreams with the same intensity if he hadn't known what it was like to be powerless himself? Because when you strip away the headlines and the controversy, you find a boy who was broken early and who decided, somewhere along the way, that he would never let the world break him again. That kind of resolve doesn't just shape a person, it defines them. It becomes the engine behind everything they do. But for Elon Musk, the journey didn't stop at surviving. He wasn't content with resilience alone. He wanted to build, not just products, but entire systems, new realities, new tribes. And in the next part of his story, that's exactly what he did. Because for all the pain of the past, Elon Musk eventually found a place he could truly belong, among a strange, brilliant, slightly chaotic group of people who spoke the same language he did. They were called engineers. In the world of innovation, there are builders and there are sellers, dreamers and deal makers, engineers who obsess over details, and executives who paint grand visions in boardrooms. Very rarely do you find someone who can live fully in both worlds. Elon Musk is one of those rare few. At his core, Elon is an engineer, driven by curiosity, obsessed with solving problems, happiest when surrounded by code, hardware, and whiteboards filled with equations. But unlike many engineers, he doesn't get stuck there. He doesn't just build in silence. He communicates, he persuades, he speaks the language of possibility, and he makes others believe in it too. It's a gift not often found in the technical world. Most engineers focus inward, on precision, on data, on design. And most business leaders focus outward, on markets, headlines, investor calls. Elon walks both paths. He can lose himself in the minutiae of rocket fuel density, and then, hours later, walk into a room full of venture capitalists and sell them a future they hadn't dared imagine. That ability to speak two languages, technical and visionary, is part of what makes him so compelling and so disruptive. Because for decades, the world of technology was divided. The engineers built it, and the executives sold it. But Elon rejected that model. He didn't want to hand over his ideas to someone else to market. He wanted to lead the entire process, from whiteboard to Wall Street. It wasn't always smooth. In meetings, Elon could speak with such intensity and depth that even seasoned investors sometimes struggled to follow. But that didn't stop him. If anything, it forced the world to rise to his level. And slowly, people started to listen, not because they understood everything, but because they believed he did. One former colleague described Elon as a walking compression algorithm, capable of absorbing vast amounts of information, distilling it down to first principles, and then building something new from scratch. Whether he was discussing lithium-ion battery chemistry or orbital velocity, he spoke with the clarity of someone who had done the work. Because he had. But perhaps what's most remarkable isn't that Elon understood so much. It's that he was willing to risk so much to bring those understandings to life. Because having vision is one thing, convincing others to see it is another. But putting everything you have, your money, your name, your future, on the line for it, that's something else entirely. And in the next chapter of Elon's journey, that's exactly what he would do. With Tesla on the brink, SpaceX struggling to survive, and public faith beginning to fade, Elon faced a choice: protect what he had, or gamble it all. He chose to gamble. And what happened next would test not just his intellect, but his limits, his sanity, and the very belief that one person could still change the world. By late 2008, Elon Musk stood at the edge of ruin. SpaceX had just suffered its third consecutive failed rocket launch. Tesla was bleeding cash and teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. The economy was collapsing. Investors were losing patience. And in the midst of it all, Elon, already deeply in debt, had a choice to make: walk away and salvage what little he had left, or go all in and risk losing everything. He chose to risk it all. Not just his fortune, but his reputation, his relationships, and what little peace he still had. He poured every last dollar he had into keeping Tesla and SpaceX alive. In fact, he split his remaining funds between the two companies, knowing full well that if either one failed, he'd likely lose both. At one point, Elon confided in a friend that he was prepared to live in the basement of his ex-wife's parents' house, if that's what it took to get a rocket into orbit. It sounded like hyperbole. It wasn't. The stakes were that high, and his conviction was that real. Most people don't see this side of Elon Musk. They see the headlines, the wealth, the internet memes. But what they miss is the pain, the isolation, the weight of building two world-changing companies at once, both on the verge of collapse. He was ridiculed in the press, laughed at by auto executives, dismissed by space agencies. Friends told him to quit. Advisors begged him to pull back. But he didn't. Because Elon wasn't just building companies. He was chasing a vision that had consumed him since he was a child. A vision of a cleaner Earth and a multiplanetary future. And he believed, stubbornly and completely, that it was still possible, even as everything around him seemed to say otherwise. Then, on September 28, 2008, something extraordinary happened. After 3 failures, the fourth Falcon 1 rocket launched and reached orbit. It was a moment of raw, tearful triumph. Elon cried, his team cried. Because they knew, if that rocket had failed, SpaceX would be over. The dream would have died right there, on that launch pad. But it didn't. And just weeks later, NASA awarded SpaceX a $1.6 billion contract. The company was saved. Tesla barely made payroll that Christmas. But a last-minute investment came through. The lights stayed on. In a matter of months, Elon went from being a crazy billionaire burning money on rockets and electric cars to someone who had just pulled off one of the most daring turnarounds in tech history. But even more than that, he proved a deeper point. That belief, when backed by action and sacrifice, can move mountains, or in his case, launch them into space. Elon's story at rock bottom isn't just about grit, it's about clarity. In his darkest hour, when almost everything had been stripped away, what remained was the one thing no one could take from him: the belief in what he was building. And that belief is what carried him through. Still, survival wasn't enough. Elon didn't come this far just to avoid failure. He wanted to shape the future, not from a safe distance, but from the very center of the storm. So how did he keep going? How did he stay clear, focused, and fearless in the face of so much chaos? The answer lies in how Elon thinks, in the way he approaches every problem, every challenge, every unknown. Because for Elon Musk, knowledge is more than power. It's armor. It's strategy. It's the foundation of everything. And in the next part of our story, we'll explore the philosophy that drives him, the mindset that helped him build the impossible, and the one piece of advice he gives to anyone who dares to dream as big as he does. For someone often described as a visionary, Elon Musk tends to offer advice that sounds surprisingly simple. But simple doesn't mean shallow. In Elon's world, simplicity is the result of digging through layers of complexity until only the truth remains. Once, when asked what advice he would give to young people who wanted to follow in his footsteps, Elon gave an answer that was both humble and profound. He said, "Don't just memorize formulas or pass tests. Go deeper. Understand the underlying principles. Get to the root cause. Always dig into the dirt." On the surface, it sounds like a study tip, something you might hear from a dedicated teacher. But coming from Elon, it means something far more fundamental. It's the key to how he sees the world and how he's been able to reshape it. This way of thinking is called first principles thinking. And for Elon, it's not just a method. It's a mindset. Instead of accepting things at face value or relying on what others say is possible, he breaks problems down to their most basic truths, like a scientist dismantling a machine until only its essential parts remain. From there, he rebuilds. It's how he figured out that building a rocket didn't need to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, because the raw materials themselves weren't that expensive. It's how he challenged the idea that electric cars had to be slow, boring, or short range. And it's how he continues to tackle some of humanity's biggest problems, from climate change to space colonization. But this kind of thinking requires more than intelligence. It requires courage. Because going to the root of a problem often means questioning everything. It means being willing to look foolish, to stand alone, to challenge convention. Not for the sake of rebellion, but in service of something better. In many ways, this is the thread that ties all of Elon's work together. Not just the innovation, not just the scale, but the mindset. A deep, almost stubborn refusal to accept the world as it is, without first asking why. It's the same mindset that allowed him to survive the brink of failure, to step into industries others avoided, and to keep moving forward when most people would have given up. And it's the same mindset he encourages others to adopt. Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. If there's one thing Elon Musk believes above all else, it's that the future doesn't happen by accident. It's built, intentionally, rigorously, piece by piece, by people who are willing to go further than anyone else. People who dig beneath the surface, who see past what is, and who build from first principles, not assumptions. That's the advice Elon gives. But more importantly, it's the life he lives. Still, this kind of vision comes with a cost. Because when you choose to see more clearly, more deeply, more completely than everyone else, you also carry more pressure, more weight, more distance from the life most people call normal. And sometimes, that weight shows up in the places we least expect, in relationships, in homes, in the quiet corners of a life lived almost entirely in service of something bigger. In the next chapter of Elon's story, we'll step away from the rockets and code, and into the human cost of genius, the part of the story that doesn't make headlines, but perhaps tells us the most about who he really is. Behind every extraordinary life, there's often a quieter story, one that doesn't make headlines, one that isn't shared in interviews or etched into biographies. It's the story of what gets left behind. For Elon Musk, that story lives in the spaces between rocket launches and product reveals, in the long hours at the office, in the missed dinners, in the quiet unraveling of relationships once full of promise. His marriage to Justine Musk, his college sweetheart, was the beginning of his adult life. They shared the early chaos, the late nights, the small apartments and big dreams. She was there when the world still didn't know his name. But as the companies grew, so did the distance. Elon's mind never rested. He lived in a constant state of building, solving, pushing. And in that relentless forward motion, something got lost. Justine has spoken candidly about the strain, about feeling more like a passenger in a vision she didn't choose, about how ambition, when left unchecked, doesn't just drive a man. It can consume him, The world, she once wrote, was shaped by men like him, but it was also often built on the backs of women like me. It's a hard truth, one we don't often talk about when we celebrate genius. And Elon is far from alone. History is full of brilliant minds who reshaped the world while struggling to hold their own worlds together. Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, Nikola Tesla, visionaries who pushed the boundaries of what's possible, but whose personal relationships were often complicated, fragile, or fractured. Because greatness demands something, and often it demands more than one person can give. In Elon's case, the sacrifices didn't end with one marriage. His subsequent relationships, including with actress Tallulah Riley and musician Grimes, have also been marked by intensity, distance, and the undeniable weight of a man constantly in motion. It's not that he doesn't feel love. It's that love exists alongside something louder, a mission that refuses to wait. Friends have described Elon as someone who lives in his own gravitational field. If you're close to him, you're pulled into the orbit. It's exhilarating but exhausting. And eventually, not everyone can stay. This side of Elon Musk is rarely seen. The one not at a product launch or in a Twitter storm. The one navigating the quiet complexities of human connection, while chasing goals that stretch far beyond Earth. And it raises a difficult question. Is it possible to give everything to the world and still have enough left for the people you love? There's no easy answer, but maybe that's part of what makes his story human. For all his brilliance, Elon isn't invincible. He's not immune to loneliness or regret. He's just a man who chose to follow his purpose, even when it meant walking a lonelier road. And perhaps that's the most powerful part of his story. Not that he always succeeded, but that he was willing to risk everything, his comfort, his wealth, his relationships, to bring a vision to life. Because in the end, the people we call visionaries aren't remembered for being perfect. They're remembered for being bold enough to see the world differently, and stubborn enough to build it anyway. And that's exactly who Elon Musk is. In our final chapter, we'll look not at the man, but at the legacy, the mark he leaves on others, and why, despite all his flaws, people still choose to believe in him.